Okay, this is the third installment. Basically, at this point, Plenum's on the ground, motors, fuel system, injectors rather, fuel rail injectors are exposed, which means I now have access to the injector conversion parts I want and the later model parts. So what I'm doing here is I'm soaking everything down in PB Blaster. Basically every screw that might be corroded, every bolt, pretty much everything that I can have access to that I'm going to take apart. It helps a lot. So preparation is the name of the game, in my opinion. So while that soaks, I'm going to set up and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the car is. I'm going to ramble on a little bit. So I figured this car is old enough that there's probably a lot of misconceptions and myths about it, and information might be getting sparse. So I figure it's a good time to start to consolidate, separate the fact from the BS, the tomfoolery, if you will. So basically what I've been tinkering with is a twin turbo Z32, which is the last, well, there's only two of them, but the later model 300ZX, which is the successor to the older 300ZX, the Z31, which was 84 through 89. And they're formidable. They have a older motor and share siblings and derivative of the Nissan pickups. The pickups have a bigger 3.3 version that some people use the blocks for builds, but they are actually a different design, older, single overhead, I believe, design. And they're stout. You can get power out of them and whatnot. They're reliable. The head gaskets have problems. They have heating problems, like it seems like a lot of Nissans do. Or I would say a lot of careless owners don't realize that Nissans are vulnerable, for lack of better words, to heating issues and neglect that part of their vehicle maintenance. That's better. Won't ever speak ill of the Nissan Datsun Infiniti pedigree, as you see by our flag up here. So before the Z31, you had the older 280ZX. Datsun still, 83, 79 to 83, which is my favorite. 79 was the obviously the first model they introduced it, first year they introduced the model. Very desirable because they had the slick top roofs, a lot of them. So they were lighter, more stiffer chassis. They had manual steering. A lot of people care about that. Most 280ZXs were power steering. A lot of people that want to do conversions or mess with them have manual steering. I use manual steering in our VQ35DE swapped 280ZX. Not 280Z, 280ZX, which is only a handful of those around. But yeah, getting back to it, the 280ZX was a it was a carryover from the Roadster of the 240, 260, and 280Z. They had disc brakes, inline six motor, 2.8 liter, very nice car for the time, late 80s, I should say early 80s car, very competitive in the 80s. But, there were still bigger displacement cars that could take the turbo models. They just didn't make that kind of power back then. They're formidable, but they went with the bigger motor in the Z31, which was a bit underpowered. The VG30 platform was a little bit underpowered. The later model Z31s had strong transmissions. They had a strong rear differential. They had the turbo late model Z31 actually had an incredibly strong R200 posi, which only the later model turbo Z31s had. The Z32 addressed everything. You know what I mean? It's sexy. It is aerodynamic. Rumors had it back in the day that they were actually either Italian designed or designed by an Italian automaker. They say the Z32's headlights are interchangeable with Lamborghini Diablo kit cars. None of this is, I haven't actually done this. I've never converted a built a kit car Diablo, so I don't know. But that was what the talk was. 16 by 8 wheels on the twin turbo model in the rear. I think there were 8.5 actually. All the Z32s had LSDs from the factory. T-tops, leather interior. It was a very comfortable car. Great date night car to take your lady out. Great night, great car to cruise around in. Powerful, potent. The Z32, I believe, had everything. They were heavy. The turbo models were about 3,500 pounds, give or take. The non-turbos were about 3,300 pounds. The non-turbo only made about 220 horsepower, which was decent for a V6, a smaller displacement V6 back in that time, but they weren't really fast. But they would compete with all the other non-turbo V6 cars of that era. Your 3000 GT, I would say maybe a V6 Mustang. Now it's Bank a V6 Mustang of that era. Who else had something? Your V6 Supra. Actually, might have been able to outdo the Supra because the Supras are kind of heavy. Anything back then that had 220 horsepower ish and 198 foot-pounds of torque ish. But the twin turbo model was what you wanted. Factory dual intercooler setup. They were just sleek. They were aerodynamic. Cracking off mid 13 second times. They actually decimated the Corvette, which nothing else was really doing besides the Buick Grand National. In the late 80s, the Buick Grand National were really ripping the 350 tune port motors apart, and it was because they had forced induction. Well, same thing with the twin turbo Z. They, the 96 Z, I believe, actually ran circles around the Vet. Somebody can stat check that, but I'm pretty sure my OG stats are good. I'm pretty sure that's when it was. The twin turbo, I believe, was in 96. Now, that would be the LT1 Corvette. So, it's also possible that it's the 90 model that I'm referencing, because that would be the tune port. I know the 93 and the ZX absolutely would stomp in a tune port. So that I know for sure. But the Z32 had a lot of great features. CD changer, I believe it was 6 disc back in the original one. Mine doesn't have the factory audio stuff anymore. But they came from the factory very well equipped, very comfortable. And it would put you in a class of, it definitely was recognized in Nissan's pedigree. So the twin turbo model had 300 horsepower. And so if you put that in comparison to the times, that's running with a lot of high-end performance cars. Not everything, but mostly enough. And for what they were, people respected them. It was a iconic piece of domestic Nissan art. Now, when I say domestic, I'm saying in the sense of, obviously the Skylines are more exotic. The R32, R33, R34, that stuff, some of the Sylvias, obviously the JDM market, what we didn't get here and what they got in Australia and Canada did offer more exotic models that would stomp and topple the Corvette as well. But for the States here, the 300ZX was top of the line Nissan that you were going to buy in a sports car model. A few guys did some conversions to these things. They put LSs in them, but I'm not really personally interested in the LS. I like the VH45DE swaps that a lot of people do on these cars. I would be interested in something like that if I stepped away from the VG 30DE TT. I would be interested maybe in doing a V8 swap kind of thing. So I'll talk about the VH45 next time. I've rambled long enough. So check me back out, and in my next video, I will probably do my fuel injectors and fuel rail.